Santa Monica Studio absolutely loves to cram its games full of neat references, secrets, and hidden details. God of War 2018 was essentially overflowing with them, to the point where we're talking about them to this day. Ragnarok, of course, ups the ante in every way possible, which includes this area as well. There's no shortage of hidden details and secret content in the game that many have missed entirely, and here we're going to highlight several of them. Note, there are major spoilers ahead for God of War Ragnarok. Sinmara. When Kratos and Atreus seek out Surtur in Muspelheim, they also learn about his wife, the ice giant Sinmara, and even though she plays a crucial role in Surtur's ultimate fate, she is never really shown on screen. God of War Ragnarok's post-game, however, does bring her to the forefront, very briefly, and still sort of indirectly. If you head to Niflheim after finishing the game and wander around the statues, you'll hear her eerily weeping in the distance as she mourns Surtur's death. Charlie.
Charlie.
The giant tortoise named Charlie had a special bond with Freya in God of War 2018, in that he was quite literally her house. But of course, Freya's lust for revenge in the years that passed after that meant she ended up being something of a distant friend to him, to say the least. If you return to Charlie with Freya in Ragnarok's postgame, you can witness their moving reunion, where Freya apologizes for neglecting him and promises to earn back his friendship. She also floats the idea of getting someone to watch over him on a more permanent basis, though we don't have any resolution for that yet. Hrausvegr. Since we first laid eyes on that damn big bird in Helheim in God of War 2018, and then never proceed to see it in any other role throughout the entire game, we've been wondering what it was even doing there in the first place. That bird, known as Hrausvegr, comes back in Ragnarok, though as part of a completely missable side quest. She essentially presides over the side quest line that sees Kratos closing Hell tiers throughout the realms, and you have to report back to her after closing all of them. No, she's still not a boss fight.
She says there's 6 tiers to close and not to expect any thanks for closing them. The tiers should never have been opened.
I think that's our cue to go.
Thor's belly. Of course, we're going to talk about Thor's glory. It's glorious, and not just because of its shape. It's glorious because it jiggles, and oh boy does it jiggle. Whether you're looking at his belly in a cutscene or watching it bob up and down while he's serving as the companion character in Atreus' gameplay sections, or even marveling at it in a boss fight, you can't help but be impressed by the belly physics on display. Oh, and that scar that Kratos leaves on his belly that can be seen throughout the rest of the entire game? That's a neat touch. After all, Kratos has a pretty gnarly scar on his own stomach as well. Ravenkeeper. God of War Ragnarok has no shortage of post-game content, all of which, by definition, entirely optional and missable. Even within that chunk of content, there are certain things that require extra time and effort, like finding and killing all of Odin's ravens, for instance. There's a great many of them, but if you do that and then return to Niflheim, you'll be able to take on one of the hidden bosses known as the Ravenkeeper, in what is definitely one of the game's more challenging boss encounters. PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale. This is probably one that you've heard of, given how widely it's been pointed out in recent days, but given how amusing it is, it's worth bringing up nonetheless. One particular conversation that Mimir and Kratos might strike up while you're exploring sees the former asking the latter about a tournament that he fought in where he did battle with beasts, scoundrels, princesses, the undead, and history's greatest musician. That, of course, is a reference to Smash Bros. Inspired crossover platform fighter, PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale, with the musician in question being Parappa the Rapper. So yeah, it seems like that part of God of War is canon now. Mimir. Ever wondered what it's been like for Mimir to live without a body? For several years, he's been a disembodied head, and in gameplay conversations in Ragnarok can see Freya asking Mimir that very question. How did it feel? And does he regret it? Mimir, of course, doesn't regret it one bit, and says that he's glad to have paid for his freedom with his life. Freya's past. God of War Ragnarok dives pretty heavily into Freya's character, and plenty of it is also tucked away into missable optional content. One side quest in particular, called Freya's Missing Piece, is one of the best side quests in the game, and essentially revolves around Kratos and Freya looking for her and destroying mementos from her past that reminds her of her time with Odin. Gná. Right off the bat, God of War Ragnarok's post-game makes it clear that the new Valkyrie Queen Gná is still a threat that needs to be dealt with. As the absolute toughest boss fight the entire game has to offer, she's essentially the very last thing you should be doing, which means a large number of people may never even get to it. If you do take the time to get to it and actually beat her though, you'll find that it was well worth the effort. Gná is without a doubt one of the best boss fights in the entire game. Tyr. The reveal that the Tyr Kratos and Atreus rescued from Svartalfheim and spent the entire game with was actually Odin in disguise all along hits pretty hard. But of course, it does also leave you wondering, where's the real Tyr? You can find him at the bottom of an abandoned Aesir prison in Niflheim, after the end of the main story. He has some interesting things to say, and you can find him in several other realms after that point, so make sure to seek him out. Kvasir's Poems. Like its predecessor, God of War Ragnarok has a number of different sets of collectibles to find. One particular set is essentially a list of elaborate secrets referring to other first-party PlayStation titles. You can find these poems written by the writer Kvasir throughout the realms, and if you pay a little bit of attention to them, you'll realize that each poem is referring to a particular PlayStation title, from Horizon Zero Dawn and Death Stranding to even MLB The Show. There's a healthy representation for a number of PlayStation franchises in here. Kratos' favorite poem. One particular conversation that Kratos and Mimir have while they're picking up the Kvasir collectibles reveals that Kratos has a personal favorite poem of his own, one from his homeland. He talks about the poem describing the Trojan War, revealing that this was at the city of Troy, that things went down differently from what the poem describes, and that, understandably enough, he prefers the poem's version of events. The Chime.
I see. You're deliberately attempting to push me into some sort of emotional outburst, aren't you? Well, I'm not so easily swayed, my good man. Stop with the stupid chime!
Ratatoskr may not be God of War Ragnarok's most prominent character, but he certainly becomes something of a fan favorite. Him and all of his ghostly spirit squirrel personas put together, in fact. You can interact with them anytime you want by striking the chime at Sindri's house. But what happens if you do it repeatedly like a crazy person? Many of you have tried it already, but if you haven't, you should. Suffice it to say, Ratatoskr is baffled by Kratos' insistence to keep striking the chime. Asgard. We spent quite a bit of time in Asgard in God of War Ragnarok, the vast majority of which has Atreus as the playable character. And though the realm is essentially just a collection of rooms in Odin's Hall for the most part, there's still some interesting things in there that are technically missable. For instance, there's a number of different conversations that you can hear about NPCs, many of which not only add intriguing flavor to the lore and to the world, but also provide some interesting context to the main story itself. The Lundbakker. Easily one of the best side quests in the game, and found pretty early on as well. But it's a little out of the way, so if you're largely sticking to the main story, you may miss it entirely. The entire quest revolves around Kratos' attempt to free a chained whale, known as a Lundbakker, at Mimir's request, who was the one who chained it up in the first place long ago in an attempt to impress Odin. It's an excellent quest not only from a design and exploration perspective, but also because it provides incredible insight into both Mimir and Kratos' characters. Bottom line is, don't miss out on it. Boat Captain. Longtime God of War fans will be very familiar with the poor boat captain, an unfortunate soul who, in the series' Greek era, suffered at the hands of Kratos' casual brutality and disregard for innocent lives on a number of occasions. After Kratos frees the Lundbakker in Svartalfheim from its chains, if you head into the journal, you'll see that the creature reminds him of the boat captain from all those years, probably centuries ago, and how he regrets having wronged him, which is putting it mildly. Medusa.
There was Medusa, queen of the Gorgons. Her gaze turned men to stone. A mirror will turn her own powers against her. Or you may remove her head. but that is the hard way.
Which did you choose?
The hard way.
Forget I asked.
Upon being asked by Freya about one of the adversaries from his homeland, Kratos decides to tell her about Medusa, Queen of the Gorgons, and how her gaze could turn people into stone. He tells her that there are two ways to deal with her. Either turn her gaze back at her with a mirror, or take off her head. Which way did Kratos choose? Freya asks a question as well, but it is, of course, a silly question. It's Kratos we're talking about here. Kratos chuckles.
Here. You may tell a story, if you wish.
Am I preferable to silence at last? A rare day.
Have you ever heard Kratos laugh or do anything that might fall in that laughing or hell even smiling arena? No, right? It feels weird to even imagine it. Just sort of feels unnatural, but lo and behold, there is one moment of laughter, or at least an amused exhalation of air. For Kratos in God of War Ragnarok, hearing Kratos chuckle is a rare experience to say the least, and it is, of course, Mimir who elicits that reaction with one of his many stories, this one involving a laird and his brother.
But since you mention it, there has been one on my mind of late. It goes back to my earliest days, when I had little more to do than observe the mortals who passed through our forest. One summer, a local laird of renowned eccentricity chose to sequester himself with a small coterie of kinsmen and followers. The aim of their woodland retreat was to achieve enlightenment through study and discipline. They took oaths to brook no distractions until they became wise men.
Distractions.
Aye, women, drink, mostly women. As you can imagine, things deteriorated quickly. By autumn, tempers were frayed and wisdom remained in short supply. One day, I watched as the laird and his brother took their hunt. There they found, at the banks of a river, a lady as fair as any they'd left behind. She pleads for their assistance for fear the currents would carry her off if she tried to cross. The laird doesn't miss a beat. He hoists her onto his shoulders, carries her across, sets her down, doffs his cap, and fords back across to his brother, who is dumbfounded, can't even bring himself to speak. The day stretches on, the laird carries on hunting, and his brother quietly gnashes his teeth down to powder. Finally, the dam breaks. "Brother," he cries, "how could you do it after everything we've sacrificed? How could you break your vow like it was nothing, carrying that lass on your shoulders like you were a Shetland pony?" The laird just smiles. "Brother, I sent that lass down across the river. 'Tis you that carries her still." Oh, I got a chuckle. A rare day indeed.
Birgir. The former traveler named Birgir sacrifices himself so that Kratos and co can complete their rescue of Freyr successfully. But pretty soon after that, it's revealed that Birgir isn't dead at all. After finding him and bringing him back is part of a side quest that the game does call attention to, but is also one that you might be tempted to skip if you're focused on the main story. Do not skip it. Not only does it provide resolution for the character's story, there's also a cool boss fight against a dragon in there. More importantly, the crater. The Birgir side quest is what leads you to the crater in Vanaheim, an entirely hidden and 100% optional massive open world area that is brimming with incredible quests, plenty of room for exploration, optional bosses, story and lore drops, and much more. Whether you're doing all this stuff as soon as it becomes accessible, or coming back to it post-game, you should make sure that you do eventually end up getting to it, because most of this content is absolutely unmissable. Faye and Thor's Duel. One particular line of side quests in the crater, dubbed Casualty of War, focuses on the frozen lightning strike in the middle of the crater. We know, of course, that that's probably Thor's doing, but how exactly did it get there? This line of side quest describes a cinematic duel between Thor and Faye long ago, talking about the clash between the two, between Mjolnir and the Leviathan axe, and how the epic fight led to the destruction of the entire crater.
This fair-haired warrior must have been Faye, brother.
Faye showed great courage to walk in Thor's path.
I'm not sure if Faye had bravery or bravado. Not many live to tell the tale of a fight with Thor.
Fenrir. God of War Ragnarok punches you in the gut hard, pretty early on. when poor old Fenrir dies in Atreus' lap of sickness. It's hard to watch, not because it's a dying wolf, but because it's the dying wolf that looks incredibly realistic. From the way he whines to his weak and helpless body movements to even the detail in his eyes as he dies. Some might say it's all a bit too authentic.
Sofna. Afra. Tesu. Sofna. Hethon. Sofna. Sofna. Sofna.
Jotunheim. Of course, Fenrir doesn't stay dead for too long and returns as a giant pet wolf after Atreus transforms his soul into Garm's body. He has a role to play in Ragnarok as well, but after that, you can also find him again in the postgame. Atreus is, of course, off on his own adventure and has left Fenrir in Angrboda's care. In the postgame, you can visit Jotunheim and find the two of them there, and yes, you can pet Fenrir.
Boy.
Facial animations. God of War 2018 took things to the next level with the quality of its facial capture and animations, and sure enough, Ragnarok follows in its footsteps. It feels like every single nuance and movement in characters' eyes and faces has been captured and translated perfectly into the game, especially in its most pivotal cutscenes. Combined with the actors' performances, that incredible level of detail makes for some really powerful character movements throughout the game. Hair and fur. Games have traditionally found it hard to properly recreate hair and hair physics, but every so often we do get rare examples of hair being done right. Ragnarok is one of those games. From the fur worn by Kratos in the beginning of the game to the wolves' own matted fur to the individual hair strands of different characters, there's a lot of good-looking hair and fur in this game. Yes, we realize that's a weird thing to obsess over, but we're in too deep at this point, so let's just go with it. Hey, did you know that we at Gaming Bolt upload new videos every day? Stick around, drop a like, subscribe, and hit that bell. Let us know what kind of content you'd like to see in the future with a comment below.